on, guys? So today's going to be a little different than my videos normally are. Start with that. Today's going to be Fiero story time. And what better than a Fiero Pilsner? I got asked recently in one of my videos, one of the comments, somebody asking some details regarding this car and the engine and a bunch of other kind of stuff with the way it's set up. And I got halfway through a very lengthy reply and started realizing it'd make a lot more sense if I just sat down and just explained everything. So if you want to skip forward a few minutes, I'm just going to go over a little bit of Fiero developmental stuff. I'm not going to go over, I'll get into this car in a minute, but I just wanted to set the stage a little bit with some developmental stuff. And there's plenty of people who have videos that are far more in depth. But basically the Fiero was started as a design or a plan by General Motors in the mid-70s. And the reason they did this was you had the fuel crisis, you had a lot of stuff where it was becoming very expensive to operate cars, and everything that was being built by an American manufacturer had a big V8 and was a big production car. Well, there's this idea of a small, wedgy sports car was a good idea, or so they thought. Now, it took them several years to get it through production, and the only way they could sell it to General Motors was they had to convince General Motors that we're trying to make an economy car. And the reason was, or the reason that's argued today, is that General Motors already argued that we have the Firebird, we have the Camaro, we already have the Corvette. We don't need another sports car in the lineup. So, well, it looks like a sports car. So the only way you're going to get this thing built is if you build it with the smallest engine possible and you make it an economy car. And that was how they built the first year, 1984. That's when they were introduced. It took that long from the mid-70s to 1984 to get this thing through production, through pre-production, through everything involved with design to get it built. And that's one of the things that is something I love about Pontiac, and actually these days Mopar, although they're kind of going a direction I'm not a huge fan of with all the electric stuff. But they pretty much immediately transferred to, let's put a V6 in it. Let's change this economy car concept and let's immediately dump a 6-cylinder in this thing and make it a sports car. Because we got to pass the brass to build the car. And we have this cool little new 60-degree V6 that GM has produced. Let's put it in there. So they created the what was called, or the specific designation of the 2.8 that was in this was called an L44. And the L44 2.8 liter V6 was actually a specific 2.8 liter V6 to Pontiac. It was only available in the Fiero. It didn't come in anything else. It used the same 2.8 Chevrolet block, but the difference was that every V6 Fiero that was ever built got the choice set of 2.8 cylinder heads off the assembly line. So anyone that had poor casting or might have had an airflow issue because there was too much flash in it, that didn't get sent to Pontiac. The only ones that got put in these cars were the cream of the crop 2.8 heads. They weren't great heads to begin with, but at least they got the good heads. Also, every single one that was built came factory with a crane cam. So the camshafts weren't a straight off the assembly line GM cam. They actually were built by a performance company some of the newer people, younger guys might not be familiar with, but it's called Crane. And they made these racing camshafts. Well, they were slightly bigger cams, a little hotter, and they were better for performance. They also built them with a slightly different intake manifold than the normal Chevrolet had, and gave them independent port injection, which was pretty cool at the time. And that's happened in 1985. When they did that, they also decided to add some aero body work, which this car has, but they left this, which is the notchback section of the car. This would not get changed until 1986 when they restyled them for the GT, or for the later GT. The early GTs like this one are all notches. But 86 through 88 GTs are all the fastback body style work. So, in any case, and that led to a few other things. You could still get a 6-cylinder in a notchback after 85, but if you were going to do that, it was going to have to either be optioned as what was called a 2M6, which was basically you went to General Motors and to a Chevy dealer or something, a Pontiac dealer, and you ordered the car with a 6-cylinder and specifically what options you wanted, and that was it. And they would build it for you and call it a 2M6. It wasn't a production model, it was just it's a 2-seat mid-engine 6-cylinder. And also the 2M4, 2-seat mid-engine 4-cylinder. But then they went ahead and added in 1988, the last year, so you had 2 flavors of V6 off the assembly line. You had GTs, which are big fastback bodywork. Then you had what were called formulas. Formulas are 2.8 V6 cars. They could have either a 3-speed automatic or a 5-speed manual by that point, and they were just straight out performance built vehicles. A Formula could have the nicer seats in it. It could have a better stereo system in it, but generally speaking, a Formula would have been like a base trim coupe with roll up windows and stuff, but with the 6-cylinder and with the 5-speed manual with the desirable gear ratios. That's how they would have built it. And getting back into a slight bit of change and a little bit of developmental stuff that changed with these cars. So 1984 through 87 cars are all the same template, okay? So all 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder cars are the same. They use the same subframe, they're built the same. The only difference being effectively what trim and stuff gets bolted on them, and obviously what engine's in them. But they're all basically the same. Now when when Pontiac built these things, they, again, going all the way back to the beginning in 1984, they had to build it as an economy car, and they had to build it cheaply to get it past General Motors, to get it into production. So they utilized basically what they do is they took a front-wheel drive car. So this is the front half of, I think, a Chevy Cavalier or something, I believe an X platform. You can look those up. It's been a while since it mattered to me. But basically it's a front-wheel drive GM economy box car. And they built the car forward of it, right? So what you have here is the same subframe and everything that would have come in the car, in a normal car, but you had to steer and everything from the front and build the car forward of it. Honestly, in a way, it's kind of genius to do that. Apart from the fact that mid-engine cars are dubious in their sales numbers, because obviously there's less room in them, things like that for storing stuff. And for passengers, it's actually extremely cheap to build this. You just build your normal economy car, front-wheel drive cars, and then you just make a car forward of all your engineering in the back, and you've built one, and it's easy. Now, the front side of these cars was essentially built out of a Chevy Chevette. Now, I don't think they used direct parts off a Chevette, but these are the design. So you have a subframe with control arms, springs, and then you have a separate set of shocks. So the problem you have here is that you have two suspension issues. In the front, obviously the Chevette was never designed for handling. When you divorce the shock from the spring and you kind of angle it the way it is, you gave these things kind of a understeer plow problem that there was no real fix for it. You can do like this when you put bigger tires on it and you can beef up the sway bar, but it's just going to try and plow on you. They understeer. They're not awful, but they do understeer comparatively to the 88 model year, and we'll get to that in a second. The back end on these, because again they were trying to do them cheap, General Motors built the car forward of a front-wheel drive car, but they were sitting here with control arms and knuckles, steering knuckles that the wheels bolt to, and they're trying to figure out how do we lock that down, right? So because you got to lock the alignment. Well, there would normally be a steering rack, and we don't have that anymore. So what they did was they just put brackets on the subframe and different ends on the tie rods and just bolt them to the subframe, and you set rear toe that way. Now that will function, that will work, that will get you into production, but the problem you're going to have here is that when the suspension compresses or decompresses, right, goes up or down, you're going to have issues where, since it's tied only at the back, it's going to cant the wheels either toe out or toe in, depending on how it's going up and down, because it's only tied at one point in the back. This led to handling issues. If you took this thing at high speed through a corner and it jounced the suspension real hard, you could end up with a situation, or you would end up with a situation where the suspension is the toe is going to change very quickly. And when that happens, it will throw the car off balance. And if the driver's not paying attention and the driver's not very familiar with them, they're going to crash. And that led to, again, bad reputations for them. People crash these things a lot. 1988 comes around and General Motors finally decided, you know what, we have the GT thing and the V6 Fiero thing has been selling, so let's try this. Let's see if we can make a production car out of this, and let's make a performance model, because we're being made fun of basically from handling in the magazines. So they re-engineered the suspension for several $1 million. And primarily what they changed was They went to, in the back of the car, they built the rear subframe so that it would have, you would have control arms at the bottom. You still have the struts going up to the top, a McPherson strut setup, but you're gonna tie your knuckles at the front and the back so that when the suspension compresses, it's locked. It can only go up and down. You can only change camber, you're not gonna change toe when it jounces or compresses. And then in the front, they went to a more modern spring, and then they actually put the shock up through it. So this gave your suspension geometry less of a forward kind of twist to it, which helped with a couple things. It made it easier to steer at low speed because they're non-power steering cars. All of them are manual rack. But it also, the geometry's better. It also meant one way or another, and I'm not an engineer enough to understand this, but it helped with the understeer problem. And it made them much better handling car. Now, the flip side of this is now if you own these things, they're far more expensive to maintain if they're an 88 because a lot of these parts are harder to find. Some of them are finally coming into production, but for years and years, you couldn't get front bearings, wheel bearings for these at all. If it was an 88, you couldn't get a bunch of parts for it because they were 1 year. GM killed the car at the end of the 88 model year. Well, that meant that there was only basically at half a year, maybe approaching 1 year of actual production for the 88. So they're much harder to find. There's far fewer of them out there. That gets us past the build and production for General Motors. That's how GM got these things past the GM, or Pontiac got them past the GM brass. That's how they got these things built. That's the way they're built. And that's just kind of some brief history on the car. Like I said, there's a bunch of people who do a much more eloquent job of explaining all of this. So let's get back into my Fiero story. This does require a drink. I had to sit here and make notes because actually it's been a while, and mine has, the people who know me know that this car has been through, I mean, it's had a story. So, first, I guess we'll go back all the way to the beginning. So this car was built, it's a 1985 model year. I have all the paperwork in here, actually, interestingly enough. It was sold to a woman who lived in California, in San Francisco Bay Area, and it lived there its entire life. It was a one-owner car. In that time, I think it was up to about it was just a touch over 100,000 miles, I think. It's in the paperwork. But basically what happened was it wouldn't pass emissions anymore. Come 2000, I think the paperwork shows like 2008, 2009, it was having trouble passing emissions. Well, in California, that's kind of a death knell for a car. You really can't do anything with it. If it's sitting on the street, you get a ticket for it. There's nothing to do with it. So they have a permanent form of like cash for clunkers, or at least they did, where you could sell the car or basically donate the car for a tax write-off. And that's what the original owner did. I happened around 2011? Yeah. I met a person who's now a good friend of mine. My first car was a Pontiac Grand Prix. And one of the common swaps for these is engines out of Pontiac Grand Prix. I didn't do it, but a lot of people do. Well, I was at a local car show in the area that I was growing up, and I met this dude and I saw the cars. I thought they were neat, and at this point I just kind of started to hear about what they were. And I asked the dude, I just hung out and talking to him, and he's like, you can get one of these for a few $100. What? So, yeah, you can buy these things for like $400 or $500. So you get in it and drive it around, and this thing's cool. I want one. Well, I started looking around for one, and I honestly can't find one in Texas. I searched for a few months. I can't find one in Texas I want that has doesn't have a title problem or is actually in close to running condition or already running, because at that time I had never worked on a car before. I knew nothing. So I needed something that at least would start. You turn the key and it would fire up and it would move, and then from there I could learn. Well, I couldn't find one, and my brother graduated high school, and I wanted to go on a road trip. I wanted to go out to see family in California, and we had planned several days for this trip. First day, we made really good time, and we were sitting in the hotel room because we shut down early, and we're like, well, what do we do? Well, I started looking around on eBay, or not eBay, on Craigslist, and I found in the Bay Area, where we were going, this car. It was sitting on an auction lot. It said that it won't pass emissions, but it runs and drives, and they wanted, I think, $800 for it. And they said they had a title for it, so I was ecstatic. So I go in and I tell my brother, I'm like, let's go buy this car. Let's get out there and buy this car. So we cannonball to California. We get all the way from like Roswell to I think Barstow in a day, and then the rest of the way the next day. And I hang out and do stuff. But on the second day I'm in California, we go look at this car in Pittsburgh, and it is a mess. But I mean, it starts and it runs. It came with, actually, let me grab it real quick. So it's a mess, right? I show up on the lot to look at this thing and I'm like, man, I don't know. It's all, I wish I had more of the photos saved from when I first got it, but I've only got a couple and I'll put them in. But I'm like, man, I don't know. And it's actually funny enough, it's sitting right next to an MR2 and they want about the same amount for the MR2. And I'm kind of like, I kind of want it. Well, the guy goes and gets this. This is the key. It is a old like Stanley screwdriver or Klein screwdriver, and the column's broken. And he sticks it in the side of the column, turns it, and fires the car up. I'm like, that's pretty neat. Not really. It means that's sketchy as hell, but figure it out. So I go and limp this thing around a parking lot because I know next to nothing about a car, and it starts and it moves, and I'm like, oh, that's good enough. So I agree to buy it, and I go to the ATM. I get a few $100s, and so I can put a deposit, and I'll come back and pay the rest when here in a couple days I'll take the car home. Well, I come back, get the car, they give me the key again, and I go start driving it. I don't make it more than a block or two before I realize it has no brakes at all. You push, the foot goes all over the floor, it just keeps rolling, it's awful. And I've never fixed a car before, and I think, well, how can we do brakes? I go to an AutoZone, I quickly get overwhelmed and was, where's a mechanic shop? I need to get it fixed. So I find these guys, and they're like these Russian, no joke, it was the weirdest thing. There's a little mechanic shop, I wonder if they still exist. If they do, I'll link it. It was this little mechanic shop with these little Russian guys working there. I think it was Russian and like one Japanese guy, and they barely speak English. But they agree to look at the car. They agree to jump it in front of these other cars they're working on. And the other cars that are there are weirdly cool stuff, like a mid-80s Rolls Royce and a few other oddball things. But they drive, and like, yeah, it needs pads. We can not do rotors, but it needs pads. They're just gone. So, okay, I know nothing. All right, man. And just give them money and we'll come back tomorrow. So we go stay in a janky hotel and come back the next day. And the guy's still working on it on the lift. And he's got something, he's fighting, and he's chasing black widows out of the frame of the car with a torch and like a pry bar. And he's showing me this. I'm feeling less and less good about this, but he finally he says, go eat lunch and I'll have it done. So go eat lunch, and I come back, and then the car's sitting on the ground, and he says it's fixed. I get in and I drive it, the brakes work. Awesome, pay him. Do one donut in front of the shop and then take off, and we start going and drive this thing all the way back home to Texas. It was one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had in my life. Driving a vehicle with no keys, the radio's broken, it's got like, I mean, it is trash. And somewhere on YouTube is actually the old video I made of it on another channel long time ago, just to put it out there. But maybe I'll see if I can find that too. But in any case, it was complete garbage. No radio, nothing. I drove it home, and it was an experience. But so I get it home and I start working on this car. Well, I have fun. I hang out with friends, and it used to be an automatic. So what it was a 1985 GT with a 2.8 V6 and an automatic transmission, which was a 3-speed with. I don't think they had overdrive. I think third gear was 1-to-1. I could be wrong, but I think that was how they were built. In any case, I get pretty tired of that pretty quick and decide after a while that I want to build an engine for it. And one of the common swaps, or one of the builds, is for people to take the 3.4 liter V6 out of a Camaro, like a 1994 Camaro, and there's a jig made by Rodney Dickman, and you can drill a hole in the other side to put the starter on the other side of the engine, and then you can put this thing in the car, and you could have a 3.4 liter V6 instead of a 2.8, because it's the same block. That's where it gets exciting. So I go ahead and build this thing. I've never built an engine before. I have nobody to tell me how to build an engine. I have no idea. And I sourced some 4-speed parts, so I could now switch it to a 4-speed manual. So I put this thing together. Transmission actually works pretty good. It was a huge pain, but I swapped it to a first-year production 4-speed transmission that had a 4:10 final drive ratio. So this thing, I mean, it was a stump puller. It wouldn't pass a gas station without needing gas because it was constantly, the RPM was super high. But with a 4:10 ratio, it was a lot of fun. But I built the engine, and the engine ran strong too. I mean, it was really happy, but it had a ton of blow-by. I couldn't figure out what the problem was. Again, I've never built a motor. Well, I take it apart, and, well, actually, before I take it apart, I start asking around with people, like, why does it have so much blow-by? And one guy asked me, did you put the pistons back in right? I kind of thought about it. Well, I put them in, and he's like, well, yeah, but are they facing the right way? There's a right way. So I take this thing apart, sure enough, 3 pistons are facing the wrong direction. And we'll get into that when we do the video on the build on the other engine, but I've got 3 pistons in effectively backwards. The rods are the wrong way around on the crank. And what it was doing was it was unbalanced because I thought round is round is not round. When things are built to the level that engines are, they need to go back in the way they do. And it tore up its cylinder walls. Bad enough that when I built that engine, I had to punch 30 over, that 3.4 was toast. So I can't remember where I got the other one because I don't think it was rebuildable. I think I got another block, and I don't remember. But I built another 3.4. And this one was happier. It ran pretty well. It was a happier engine. I had some oil leak issues with it, but it was mostly okay. Fast forward, I like to go to the drag strip with some friends, and I used to do this with the old automatic transmission. I did it with the previous engine. Well, I'm out there, and I go to launch this thing on the drag strip, and the first year production transmission cases are fragile. They're very fragile. So what had happened was, I go to launch this thing, and I remember the guy sitting at the line. He's like, we knew the car's not a fast car, but we're going to take off and see what we can do. Well, he said he saw the car rear back. He saw it almost pull a wheel off the ground. There was way too much traction on the track that night. They had recently redone it for all the big tire cars and stuff, and it reared back. He said he saw almost the front tire come off the ground. He watched, like, it looked like all the flex came out of the car, and then he just heard a bang. And that's what I heard too, and the back half of the transmission snapped off. and it just fell and dumped fluid on the ground and just limped it off to the shoulder. Alright, go for it. So, time for a trans. So I go track down another 4-speed transmission. The next 4-speed doesn't have a 410, it's a later one. It's got the tougher case in it, and it's got, but it has a much more tame, like 355 ratio or something, or 327 gear ratio in it for a final drive. Okay, so I put that in and it runs and drives, it's okay. Fast forward about a year after that, it's been 1 year on the new Happy 3.4. It's running happy, it's running good. I hadn't had a problem, really hadn't had to lift the hood on it. So I go with my friends, I'm like, you know what, let's go down to Port Aransas and let's go have fun for the weekend down at the beach. So we're on the beach at like late at night, and we're driving along, and we hit some soft part of sand, and the car digs its way to the ground, along with the car in front of me, which was a Lexus SC400 being driven by one of my other friends. And I will say the friend that was in the passenger seat, who had bad luck of being in cars for like the prior 2 years before, every car he got in died. I mean, violently, like an engine would fail or something. He was riding with me, and I'm tempting fate here. Well, as soon as it digs to the ground, he doesn't miss a beat. He jumps out and starts trying to rock the car, get out, push it, rock it. And we start rocking this thing out of the sand, and we eventually get it dug out, hang out a little while, and we're like, all right, let's go to the hotel. Well, on the way to the hotel, we start realizing this thing's throttle hanging wide open. It's just not running right. My friend behind me calls and says it's smoking. It's losing power. This is not good, not good. We limp it to the hotel, park it. There's a pool of oil underneath it and a trail into the parking lot. This is not good. Open the back of the car. It's rattling and knocking. It's not happy. I take a look at the intake system, the factory air canister. It has rust holes in it, and it sucked sand through it while it was stuck on the beach. It sent, I don't know how much sand into that engine, but it destroyed all of the rings in it, tore up all the bearings. It's got so much blow by. It's smoking literally like a freight train. It's trash. Well, we're idiots, and we've been watching Roadkill and stuff like that for like the last 2 years. So we think, well, let's change the oil tomorrow and see if we can drive it. Okay. We go change the oil in the hotel parking lot, and it's not any better. It's still smoking and knocking and just garbage. It's ruined. But we start thinking like, okay, well, let's see, can we do the math here? 1 second. It's one of those stories. So let's see here. Can we, I have AAA membership, and AAA will tow the car for 100 miles for free, but I'm 140 miles from home. That means I need to sling this thing. It doesn't have to live, it just has to make it 40 miles to get it all the way to the house. Or I've got a buddy's house in Alamo Heights in San Antonio. I only got to make it something like 20 miles to get it towed to his place for free. All right, we kind of drive it around, get kind of confident in it. I mean, it's still billowing smoke and pouring oil out the bottom. We're just filling it up again. And you know what? It seems like it's okay. Let's try and drive it home. About 8 miles out of Corpus, northbound, it lets go. It's I can't remember. I think a rod bearing slipped or something, and then it somehow I don't remember. I don't know how it snapped a wrist pin or something because the rod came loose, and it just beat a hole in the side of the oil pan. It's just apocalyptic failure. And I mean, billowing smoke, oil all over the ground. So we called AAA. We only made it 8 miles. So I ended up paying like $200 to get it towed to Alamo Heights and to this nice neighborhood and park it out on the street. And it's still got an oil trail out underneath it. I borrow a buddy's truck a week later, come back, and this was a weekend deal. I drive down there with a tow dolly, pick up the car, or go to pick up the car, and we don't have a winch or anything to put it on there. We're like, how do we get on the tow dolly? Let's see if it's got enough life to get on the tow dolly. So we go ahead and turn the key, fire it up, and I mean, it's still flailing the rod around inside of it. It's pouring oil on the ground. It's a horrible racket on like a Saturday morning in Alamo Heights, which, if you're not familiar, is a very, very nice area. And we lift this thing onto the tow dolly, ratchet strap it, and take off in this old Ford truck before anybody can stop us. Thank God. Drive it back to the Buda area, just south of Austin, where I was at. Drop it in my parents' driveway, and then turn the truck around, drop the tow dolly there, and I drove all the way out to what's called Alvarado, which is up north near Dallas, kind of between like Waco and Dallas. I go to get an engine for it, come right back. This is all in the same day. I think I get home at like midnight or something with the truck, get a hoist out, pull the engine out. Buddy comes to pick up the truck next day, or I had a truck for a couple of days. But the next morning I get up and start swapping it. So I swapped the engine in one day in the garage. So it was a 2-day, bring the car home, go get the engine, swap the engine, get it running again. And it ran. It ran. It was running again this time. This was a 3.1 liter that someone had put together. So what they had done was, if memory serves, I forget the engine designation, but I think it was a 3.1 out of like Alumina or Malibu. Same family of 60-degree V6 that the L44 is. So I swapped that into the car, and it actually ran really well. It ran great. No real issues with it until the 4-speed started just having problems. The 4-speed that was in it the synchro started, I think it was 3rd gear, started grinding. So it was time for a swap. So I was like, okay, let me do a 5-speed swap. So I swapped it to a 5-speed Getrag at that point. So now we have 5-speed in the car, and a pretty happy 3.1. I know next to nothing about it, but I've got the factory fuel injection and everything on it still. And it runs strong, it's happy. Well, I get it in my head, I'm like, you know what, I want more performance out of this. And this is getting back to, again, the reason I'm making this video. Someone's asking more about the engine that's currently in it. We're finally getting there. So the 6-cylinder, that 3.1 liter V6, I start looking around. What was getting popular at the time, this is like 2015, 16, 17? I think it was probably about 2016, 2017. What was getting popular was standalone EFI systems. There were a couple. Mega Squirt was the big one. There were a couple other oddball ones, and then I think and Fitek came out at the time. They were the only one that beat everyone to market with a 4-barrel carburetor style throttle body injection system. That as long as you had a 4-barrel manifold, you could bolt it on anything. Basically, tell the computer the displacement, and like a miracle, it would run the car. So I'm like, okay. Everything I've known now, and I've now owned the car for a long time, everything I've known now about the 6-series V6 and what people complain about is that they have airflow problems. The airflow problems that everyone describes start at the top with the intake being restrictive, the cylinder heads being restrictive. That's apparently the death knell, and the airflow is awful. And then the manifolds, they have these little log style manifolds that are made out of steel tube. Allegedly, these things are the flow problem. You can't get air in, you can't get air out. So this thing just doesn't make power at all. It'll make kind of low end torque because it's what it's built for, but it won't make any power. And they were rated, I think, for 130 horse and 170 pound-feet, depending on year. I think 85, oddly enough, the stock V6 was somehow rated for 10 more horse than any other year. But so I'm like, okay, well let's call BS on this. Let's build the ultimate 2.8 or 6-series V6 family. So let me go ahead and let's do an Edelbrock. Edelbrock makes, it's oddly enough, they make what's called a performer intake called a Torquer 2 6-series V6. And it's a 4-barrel manifold for that engine. Now it's designed to be in the S10. So it's got a little bit of a cant to it, so you have to put a wedge plate on top to make the TBI sit level, because in the S10 the engine's cocked up a little bit and it wouldn't have needed it to keep the TBI level. Well, I go ahead and start to work on this thing. When I pull the factory intake off, I look down in the ports and I'm looking at this thing, I'm like, oh my God, it has ported heads. So I called the dude I bought the engine from and the headers that are on it too. I had West Coast Fiero's shorty headers on it that I'd got from him too. I said, hey man, did you know this thing has ported and polished heads? No, it doesn't. Yeah, it does. I sent him pictures. He's like, you words I'm not gonna say. He's like, I didn't believe. He's like, all I know about that engine. He said, I lost the build sheet paperwork. I'm not lying. You. I do not know. He said, all I do know is that. And he was a 3800 guy, so 2.8s and 6-series V6 family was not really his thing. He tended to buy cars and swap in 3800s. So to him, it was a hot, healthy engine, and the guy had made some claims when he bought it, but he didn't really care. He said, I lost the paper. He said, all I know is that engine was put together by a performance shop in El Paso. I don't know. He said, sometime in like the early 2000s. I don't know much about it. All I know is I think it had a Schneider cam. But that's all I actually know about it. I don't have any of the paperwork. I lost it. Well, okay, man. So I go ahead and throw the intake manifold on it and the TBI and get it running, and it runs pretty good. It's happy on the early Fitek fuel injection, and it doesn't fit under the hood, so instead of cutting it, I just took the hood off. I made an insert that covered just the trunk, and I left the back open because I'm an idiot. And I thought it'd be pretty cool. It was not cool. I mean, it was cool the way it drove around because it had a big intake and it rocked back and forth and stuff. But the problem I ran into was when it rained and I would have to go out there and put like a tarp over it and stuff. Well, a trip came up, a family trip opportunity came up, and I went and did that. It happened to be, and that's a whole nother crazy story, but I left Texas during Hurricane Harvey, and I came back and realized I forgot to cover it. And I've now been gone for like a week or something, and I come back and I'm like, well, hopefully the water's evaporated, so let me start it up. I fire it up and immediately bend a rod. Because again, I'm an idiot. I should have pulled the plugs out of it, spun it over. It would have had corrosion, but at least it probably would have lived. So I bent a rod and I thought, well, I mean, and it ran, it just knocked. So let me, all right, I guess we're doing another engine build. So I go and ruin my credit card again and buy everything, pay to have this thing bored out and everything, you know, honed out and everything. So I built a 3.1 again. No, I don't think I worked with the 3.1 at that point, because I want to say, it's taken me a while to remember, it's been years. I want to say the 3.1, it was already been punched out and I didn't want to mess with it. And and because since it had water in it, the bores were ruined. So I tracked down a 2.8 from another good friend of mine, Bill Heiner, who lived in the Austin area, and sadly he's passed away recently, which is pretty sad. But I had gotten this 2.8 V6 from him. It was an 86 block. It came out of his wife's car, I think, and he had done another build for her car, but he's like, it's buildable. And it had this Engine Tech cam in it. It's Melling Engine Tech. It's a little bigger than stock. It's got a little more lift, not much more duration. I think about the same duration. I'll see him put the specs up. But so I go to rebuild this engine. Build it, put it in the car with the Fitek fuel injection again, and the ported heads and everything. And it's actually pretty happy. It ran great. We got the 5-speed now. I cut a hood to actually fit the thing to keep rain out of it. And it's pretty cool. I'm happy with it. But I pretty much immediately start running into issues. Well, I run into one big issue. So the car had been running for, God, 2 months, 2 or 3 months. I think I put a couple thousand miles on it, 2,000 or 3,000 miles. So it's out of break-in. It should be happy. It's got a comp cam in it. It's happy. But I never threw away the Engine Tech cam. I left it sitting on the shelf because I was like, well, it's a good cam. It ran when it was in there, just in case I need it. And I go on a date with my now wife, and everything goes good on that, and I come home with it. I get within one intersection of the house, put it in first gear, lean away from the stop, the light turns green, and it just immediately starts backfiring out the intake manifold. It's like the throttle revs up and then immediately revs down, and it just sounds awful. And I have no idea what happened. I limp it back to the house, messed with it the next day, and sure enough, when you rev it up, it's backfiring out the intake. I get an old mechanic friend to help me with it, and sure enough, it sheared a camshaft. It wiped out at least one lobe, actually 2 lobes. And I still have that cam. I painted it into a lamp. But that cam is shot. It needs a camshaft. And I'm thinking, well, so now there's metal through this whole thing. And I don't have the money to rebuild this engine. I don't. I overextended myself building it the last time. I don't, but I have this cam. I'm like, okay, Hail Mary, let's pull the engine. I'm gonna pull the engine back out, and I'm gonna change the camshaft out and put a new set of lifters in it, and just cross my fingers. Just cross my fingers it lives. And it has. That was back in 2018. And it's been good ever since. A couple oil changes in. I couldn't get all the metal out of it. There were piles of metal, sheared metal, burned up and turned into like magma or something. That was kind of like sandy. That was sitting in the cam valley, like just below the camshaft. I couldn't get it all out. I didn't expect it to live any length of time, so that's why I kind of didn't care. I put the cam in it, change the oil, hope for the best. And I changed the oil like religiously every 500 miles for the first year or so. I sent the oil off for testing and got my results back, and they told me, well, it's full of like, there's a little bit, you've got plenty of zinc in there, you're adding zinc to it, but there's a little bit of extra metal in there, but nothing we're real worried about it, no bearing material, so rock on with it. So it's been happy ever since, and now it's 2024. This car has not been driven all that much in the last 5 years or so. It gets driven, but certainly not like it used to be. It used to be I daily drove this thing all the time, up until back when I worked in the automotive industry, when I worked as a mechanic, up until about 2020 when I started doing what I do now. And so I daily drove this, and then now my current work, I have a vehicle for work. I don't need to drive this, so this is just a weekend car now. But so the engine that's in this is a 2.8 liter. Because I didn't want to go. I thought I still have the stroker crank. I thought about trying to build this engine with a stroker and just build an ultimate 3.4. But I sat down with the machine shop guy. The guy who did my machining, which doesn't do it anymore. He's out of business. He did it for decades and he stopped. He ran a little speed shop in South Austin. Leo Machine and Speed, I think is what it was called. But in any case, he sat down with me because there was a miscommunication when we determined what we were going to bore it and ordering pistons for it and stuff like that. And he sat down and started digging through all of his manuals, and he's like, man, I don't understand why y'all do this. I said, why? He said, why do y'all do the 3.4 swap? I said, well, because it's bigger. It's more bore and more stroke in it. It should have more power. He said, yeah, but you're losing compression. I said, what? And I don't remember all the details. We sat down and went through it, but basically what we came down to, and I do know this for sure, the 3.4 pistons are a shorter piston. The 2.8 pistons are very tall. That's why you can't run a 3.1 stroker crankshaft with the 2.8 pistons, because you'll hit the valves. It's just not an option. So he's like, if you can have a 3.4, we can redo all that, but you're not going to make, your compression is going to be lower, you're going to make less power. Why not just have a hot 2.8 at 9.5 to 1? So that's what we did, and we rebuilt it, and it's been a great engine. And now with the new fuel injection, the updated ECM and everything that's in my old TBI, which was in the last couple of videos, it's just been great. It's been very happy. So I think that pretty much goes into, that's pretty much it for where it's at now. This car's been a long story. I've had it for a very long time. I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about it. I hope it explains a little bit of what's going on with it. There's literally, I've had every fastener off this vehicle. The only thing I haven't removed from this car at some point, maybe the dash. Other than that, every single bolt has come off this car at one point. Dash and some of the body panel. Other than that, everything else has come off this car at some point or another for maintenance or repair or restoration. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it gave you a little more clarity on it. We'll get back to doing a little more build stuff here in a minute. I've got more oil leak stuff to diagnose on the Dodge, and then that engine build, we're just about ready to go. I've got a lot going on this month, so I don't have time to do the build and film it and then build the car and swap it into the white car, but I'll get it done soon, and then we'll get some videos on that. So, all right, thank you for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day.